Hey folks, Christian Swain here, CEO of Pantheon Media, where fans belong. And starting now, Pantheon is where fans invest. You now have the opportunity to own a piece of Pantheon. Equity crowdfunding raises capital from many small investors in exchange for equity shares. We're working in partnership with Start Engine. They're an equity crowdfunding platform registered with and overseen by the SEC. To start, we want to express our gratitude to our amazing fans. As a token of our appreciation, you, our loyal listeners, are first in line for an exclusive opportunity to invest early and grab a piece of the Pantheon action, along with special bonus discounts and perks for joining us at the beginning of this exciting journey. Simply put, rather than donate, like you would with, say, GoFundMe, you're actually purchasing shares of the network. You'll be shareholders, co-owners, right along with us. Together, we've built a vibrant fan community. It started with music, and now we're engaging sports fans too, in a big way. Please consider taking this next step with us to collectively grow and benefit from Pantheon's future success. Go to startengine.com/Pantheon Media to find out more. Again, startengine.com/Pantheon Media. Invest in your passion, invest in your community, consider investing in Pantheon.
Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Joining me once again as guest curator is my former Tunestiles co-host, Jay Sweet, as well as friend of the show, Jimmy Mitchell. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Hello there.
Good to be here.
Now, we all know Jay's a board shorts wearing regular here, but Jimmy, you're a first-time guest, so I'd like to start by asking you, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
I used to make mixtapes. I grew up in the cassette era in the 70s outside of New York City, and a lot of the mixtapes weren't even, we would just listen to the radio, like Oldies 101 FM, and I would just run the tape. And I got a lot of my oldies and doo-wops from that.
Well, Jay, back on episode 51, you and I dove into the ultimate golden oldies and doo-wop of the 50s and 60s. And during that episode, we said we need to do a volume 2 ASAP. Well, apparently ASAP in our terminology means 40 plus episodes later. So in a better late than never moment, we're finally getting to volume 2. What were you looking to bring to the table this evening with your second batch of oldies but goodies?
Well, I got to tell you, I think we talked a little bit about how the music of, if you know about me, if you know me well, or if you know a little bit about me, my musical tastes are all for those high, tight harmonies. And I got a lot of that out of the doo-wop era. So, we talked about American Graffiti, about how that was probably the penultimate soundtrack for the ultimate doo-wop and oldies music mixtape. But my dad, we'll talk a little bit about this, I'm sure, as we go on. My father played in a band called The Professors when I was real young, and they used to play all sorts of covers of great oldie songs, and I just fell in love with it since I was knee high to a knee, as they say.
Now, Jimmy, as you're being a new guest on the show, you're bringing an outside perspective. Now, you've heard Volume 1, which is episode 51 for those listening, and now you're joining us for Volume 2. What were you looking to bring to the table with your bank of songs for this evening?
Well, I grew up in the 70s in the disco area in New York City, and I hated disco. And oldies was popping up, and the group Sha Na Na, which originated in New York City and was getting hot, and then had a TV show, and I fell in love with doo-wop. I was in a profession that I couldn't be in a band or anything, and 20 years later, I took that love of doo-wop and created a doo-wop a cappella group up here in Syracuse, New York, and after a few years of that, added a full band and kind of did our version of Sha Na Na, doing those kind of harmonies and songs that I loved, and especially the deep doo-wop. WCBS FM on Sunday nights, Don K. Reed would dig into some cool classic doo-wop. And then in the 90s, between the PBS doo-wop specials and just all the stuff that we can get on the internet, I could just find more and more about this stuff.
Well, for me, quite frankly, Jay, I had so many leftovers from Volume 1. I'm just going to keep pulling from those unless you guys scoop me on these song choices.
There are so many. I mean, we talked about that towards the end of the episode that, we could do a Volume 2, we could do a Volume 20 at this point.
Well, tonight, as I mentioned at the top of the show, for this Volume 2 episode, Jimmy, Jay, and I will be curating the ultimate golden oldies and doo-wop of the 50s and 60s mixtape, and we'll use the old cassette deck approach. But since I have two guests this evening, the format will be slightly altered from the usual, as tonight Jimmy will begin side A with his first song choice, and then we'll roundtable the panel until we've mapped out 10 songs for side A. We'll then give our mixtape a proverbial flip, and we'll map out side B, only this time Jay will kick off the roundtable discussions. Our overall goal for the episode is to craft the best golden oldies and doo-wop mixtape possible through this new batch of 21 songs, or 7 song choices each. At the end of the show, you can take our conversation to the next level by visiting the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com to give our final mixtape a listen via the embedded playlist. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, and so much more, such as chiming in on episode topics such as this one, which a few of the Patreon mixtapers have done, and I'd like to give a quick shout out to a few of those. Christopher Pazika chimed in with the Penguins' Earth Angel. Philip Bergman chimed in saying, as someone who made 40-ish mixtapes just from the oldie station in his younger days, picking one song is cruel. I think we all feel that pain tonight. But he went back to the dawn of rock and roll with Bill Haley and his Comets cover of Big Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Chad Lamassa chimed in with the Monotones' The Book of Love. Mike Daly chimed in with a more modern cover song, and you know me and my love of cover songs. He went with Huey Lewis and the News' take on the Soul Brothers 6's 1967 track, She's Some Kinda Wonderful, from their Four Chords and Several Years Ago album. If the Soul Brothers 6 doesn't ring a bell, in 1973, Grand Funk Railroad covered this song, and that version reached number 3 on the Billboard US Hot 100. Ben from the Too Vague podcast chimed in with Roy Orbison's 1964 hit, Workin' for the Man. Brandon from Virginia chimed in saying his mother-in-law would force a divorce if he didn't suggest Never My Love or Along Comes Mary from the Association, since his wife's stepfather was in the original band. And finally, Ed Kennard chimed in with the Rays' Silhouettes on the Shade. Once again, if you'd like to chime in for future My Weekly Mixtape episodes, come join the fellow mixtapers at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. So Jimmy, the Patreon mixtapers put a ton of musical food out in the atmosphere, and with that, I'm officially pressing the record button on our mixtape, and the floor is yours. Why don't you dive into the song you chose to kick off side A?
Everything that you probably thought you knew about the 50s is probably wrong. Jay's mentioned American Graffiti and Happy Days and all that. Well, in 1968, we had the riots recently, and they had closed down Columbia. Well, in 68, they closed down Columbia. Some students actually took over the campus and kidnapped the dean. And then the next year, Columbia was willing to do anything to kind of, as a pressure release valve. So they had their a cappella group, the Kingsmen, do a show, and they wanted to get a recording contract. They had some guys there.
And that group was Sha-Na-Na?
Sha-Na-Na. Oh, did I leave that out? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Kind of knew where you were going with that, but
it was Sha-Na-Na. They couldn't be called the Kingsmen because Kingsmen had Louie Louie.
Right.
So their agent said, can't call you the Kingsmen. I'll call you the Put-Ons. And George Leonard, who is the genius behind this whole creation, said, no, we should be called Sha-Na-Na after Get a Job by the Silhouettes. Sha-Na-Na, na-na-na-na-na. And that's what was born. So to make a long story short, they decided to add a band, and they did a couple of gigs at Columbia. And then they got a gig in New York City in Steve Paul's The Scene, and they were playing for the theater crowd after they got out. And they caused such a scene. And the Village Voice called them the In Act to See. So the last night before the mob shut down the scene for not paying protection money, this artist came in and said, you guys got to be at Woodstock. And they said, what's a Woodstock? And that's why Get a Job by the Silhouettes was played at Woodstock. And that's my choice to kick off this set.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. There is so much to say about Sha-Na-Na, and I know you mentioned that at the top of the show that they had their own variety showcase. I believe that they were guests on the Muppet Show, were they not?
Mr. Bassman was sung on the Muppet Show, but I don't think Sha-Na-Na was on it.
Okay. And I know they were featured prominently in the movie Grease in 1978, which was a lot of these great standards, oldie standards that kind of came out of that. And it's an excellent pick. It's an excellent Get a Job is a great way to start off a mixtape with an oldies vibe because of that great get a job. I love that. I don't have the basso like you do, but it's such a great. It rocks you right into it.
Released in 1957 and reaching #1 on the Billboard Pop and R&B singles charts, it's the band's only hit single, making them a perfect candidate if we were to ever do a one-hit wonders of the 1950s episode. Now, Jay, you've already mentioned it, but I knew this song growing up from the incredible soundtrack to American Graffiti, which, let's be honest here, if I were to just sit here and rattle off song by song for my 7 choices, all from American Graffiti, I could pretty much convince anybody that I did a bang up job on my work for this evening, because to me, it's one of the best compilation driven soundtracks I've ever heard.
Absolutely.
And with that, Jay, you get to follow it up with your first song pick of the evening, track 2.
All right. And so I'm going to go off of the Sha-Na-Na road and introducing my introduction to doo-wop at a tender age through the Grease soundtrack. We mentioned, as I mentioned just a little while ago, Sha-Na-Na featured prominently in that. And Tears on My Pillow, Little Anthony and the Imperials. And that was a great song, and actually was one of the solos that I did as a member of Street Corner.
Didn't you sing that to a broken wine bottle?
That I did. Somebody had broken a glass of wine, and we Rob Searle, who was also in the group, and I kind of riffed on that and sang tears about my wine being broken.
Tears on My Pillow, Little Anthony. Great documentary by Little Anthony and the Imperials. It's on YouTube, and he talks about their first recording session. And this song, Tears on My Pillow, was given to them kind of toward the end of the recording session. The guy, it was a new song, and the guys singing it thought it sounded like Earth Angel. So instead of whoa, they just changed it to ooh, ooh. And it's pretty much the same progression, that. The same song in different key with different words. They could do that back then.
This was released in 1958. It was Little Anthony and the Imperials' debut recording. The song reached #4 on the Billboard US Hot 100 and #3 in Canada. It was a 2-sided hit because the B-side, Two People in the World, also became a hit for the group. And you can thank legendary New York DJ Alan Freed for the band name, as they were originally known as the Imperials, but he announced them on air as Little Anthony and the Imperials, and the rest is history. Now, Jay, you know me and my cover songs. In 1990, Kylie Minogue scored a worldwide hit with her faithful rendition of the song that, while it didn't chart in the US, hit number 1 on the UK singles chart, number 2 in Europe, number 35 on Canada's adult contemporary chart, number 2 in Ireland, and number 20 in Australia, among others. So a worldwide hit. And considering Kylie's cover of The Locomotion was such a huge hit in the US a couple of years earlier, I was shocked her version of Tears on My Pillow didn't catch on either.
Yeah, I was going to mention that her version of The Locomotion was a huge hit here.
Yeah, you couldn't escape it. And then this was apparently the follow-up that hit all over the world, just not here in the US.
Except here.
I didn't know it existed. I'm looking forward to looking and listening to that.
It's a female-fronted, very faithful to the original with that little bit of late 80s, early 90s pop sheen on it. So it's an interesting cover, to say the least. Now, following up Get a Job and Tears on My Pillow, I'm going to stay in the 1950s and go with a song that was written in 1959 by one of the greatest songwriting duos of that era, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. This song reached number 23 in the US and number 20 in Canada. However, it wasn't until another band re-recorded it in 1964 where it jumped to number 3 on the Billboard US Hot 100. I'm going to go with the original and 1959's Love Potion number 9 by the Clovers. However, the Searchers version is the one that is the quote-unquote bigger hit. Now, there's also another cover version of this song that I'm sure many, many vinyl collectors have probably seen and maybe heard, because anybody who's ever gone vinyl hunting on this earth has certainly stumbled across a copy of Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass's 1965 album, Whipped Cream and Other Delights. If you've gone vinyl hunting and you see a copy of this record, but you haven't heard it, pick it up and give it a listen. It's a very interesting rendition. This track, Jay, like the Silhouettes Get a Job, also appeared on the American Graffiti soundtrack and was the premise of a 1992 Sandra Bullock movie of the same name.
Yeah, I was going to point out that the Clovers version was the one that was featured on American Graffiti. And it is probably, I'm trying to figure out why it is that you were so enthralled with the Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass album cover. I'm not familiar. Why would that be?
We're an audio only podcast. I guess you'll have to find the album cover and figure it out.
Kids, ask your parents' permission.
If you talk to doo-wop aficionados, the Clovers version is the only version we should be talking about. It's got the great bass voice, and also cool thing about this. Now, we recorded this with Street Corner, and there were 2 versions of this, and I believe the single just had the Love Potion number 9 on and on. And I think it was in the album version that at the end said, "Hadn't so much fun that I'm going back again. I wonder what happened with Love Potion number 10. So it's such a short song. There's only 2 lines in each verse. It's such a short song that when we performed it, it was too short. So we wrote another verse. It was a little hokey. We had Karen, a girl, singing it. And I think she wrote, I'm glad I found Madame Ruth. I found my man. Now he knows the truth. I've had so much fun that I'm going back again. Wondered what happened with Love Potion number 10. And then Love Potion number 9.
Well, Jimmy, with that, we are back to you for track 4. Where do we go from Love Potion number 9 or 10?
Okay, this song, any kid who's ever gone by a piano, you've probably heard this. Well, that progression goes back to the 30s. Then it became a standard doo-wop progression. And it was actually the first one to do it was Richard Rodgers and Lawrence Hart with the song Blue Moon, which is a pretty little ballad. In the 20s, I believe, My grandmother, Martha Wetmore, she studied expensively, as her father called it, at the New York Institute for Music, which is now commonly known as the Juilliard School. And her classmates were Dick Rogers, Larry Hart, Lawrence Hart, and Herbie Fields. And they were impressed that she wasn't Jewish like they were, that she was female, not male like they were, and that she wasn't from the city. She was from Glens Falls, New York. So they just had a wonderful friendship. And when I was in the second grade, and my grandmother passed before I was born, I had an assignment for music class, and we had to reach out to stars in New York City. And my mother just was giggling with glee and had me write Richard Rogers. And he typed me back, and you could tell he typed it himself because the punctuation was all wrong. And if you know what a typewritten letter in the 70s should have looked like, this wasn't it. And he said, Jimmy, I certainly do remember your grandmother. I remember stopping off on an automobile trip in Glens Falls just so we could say hello to her. And she was a wonderful woman, so it doesn't surprise me for you writing me such a kind letter with such a kind note from your mother. And I have the letter and the picture autographed, and it says, to Jimmy Mitchell from his grandmother's friend, Richard Rogers.
Wow.
And another gentleman who went to Juilliard as a kid and then went to Columbia University, as did Lawrence and Hart and Fields, was John Bowser Bauman, who's known for so I give you Blue Moon by the Marcells.
Amazing. Worlds just colliding all over the place because obviously Richard Rogers, Dick Rogers, is half of the infamous Rodgers and Hammerstein, who did whole bunches of really beloved musicals on Broadway. The Sound of Music, made famous, of course, by Julie Andrews, about the Von Trapp family, who focused on singing and those gorgeous tunes, those gorgeous medleys that came out of Austria and in the time of of World War II, pre-World War II. Glens Falls, which is a place up there called Sandy's, which my old band used to play at after my wife, I should say, had my first daughter, our second daughter. We moved to Albany, and I was playing up there, and we would do a whole bunch of great covers up at Sandy's Clam Bar, and the fried clams were amazing, and enjoyed that thoroughly. But of course, Blue Moon, which was also covered by Sha Na Na in Greece in 1978. They did the more down-tempo version of that, the ballad version. And at the end, famously, one of the boys pulls his pants down, or three of the boys, right? And the spotlights are careening all over the place. And they will find you, and there will be justice meted out for that.
The 1961 single reached #1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, as well as #1 in Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. It's also featured on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list of 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. I was surprised to learn that Elvis Presley's cover, while it spent 17 weeks on the Billboard US Hot 100, peaked at number 55. So it was there for a long time, but never cracked the top 40. That actually surprised me because I also, having family members that were very big into Elvis growing up, was very familiar with his version as well. This song was also covered by the Mavericks for the soundtrack to the movie Apollo 13, as well as by Rod Stewart with some guy named Eric Clapton for his Stardust, The Great American Songbook Volume 3 album. So Blue Moon, throughout the decades, continues to brighten people's musical lives. And just keep your pants up. Jay, what are you following that up with?
All right. So where do we go from the Marcells? Oh, let me go. All right, let's go back. I mentioned I have been doing audio in some form or another of mixing and creating audio boards and consoles, and then that naturally translated into radio and then television, where I currently reside. But I have been doing audio in some form or another since I could distinguish the difference between bass and treble, which I owe greatly to my father and his band, The Professors. When I was, say 8, maybe 7, I was given a solid gold guitar. And it was not a solid gold guitar. It was a black plastic toy with nylon strings that had solid gold emblazoned on it. And my dad's band used to do a cover of this song, and this was where I figured out how to play guitar. I would sit on the edge of my toy box as my dad's band was rehearsing, The Professors, and I would pluck away at the strings until I could match the pitches. So I was my dad's first kind of roadie, his sound technician, and I figured out how to play guitar by ear, listening to them play Run Around Sue by Dion.
Wow, that's a great dance song. I DJ'd for some time before I had the band and a little bit afterwards, and weddings and events and like that. What a great song to dance. If you want to get the dance floor full, you play Run Around Sue. Always had it in our set list from the a cappella days through the 7 years of the band. I was listening to our last show and we were still singing that song. And as if you're in a band long enough, you get bored with singing a certain song, and we would have different lead vocalists sing the song over the years. But great pick. Dion had left the Belmonts at this point, and their backup group that were singing this was a group called the Del Satins. And I don't think they ever had any hits of their own. I know they tried, but they were a very well-known backup group in studio work, the Del Satins.
Our first artist revisit to Volume 1. I won't share what Dion's song made the cut on Volume 1, just in case you haven't heard that episode yet. But if you want to check it out, myweeklymixtape.com, episode 51. The 1961 single that reached number 1 on the Billboard US Hot 100, as well as in the UK, Canada, and New Zealand. It also reached number 2 in Australia. I get to do another movie reference here, Jay. Normally, I'm not a big movies guy, but the 1980s had a lot of movies that looked back to the 1950s for their soundtracks. And one of those was one of my favorite 1980s comedies when I was in high school and in college, The Hollywood Knights, starring Robert Wuhl, Tony Danza, Fran Drescher, and Michelle Pfeiffer. You might recall the song being performed in the movie, and that was actually a cover done by Casablanca recording artists Brooklyn Dreams. Yes, that's the same Casablanca Records that has Kiss. I just wanted an excuse to talk about Hollywood Knights because that movie is absolutely hysterical. And with that, I'm going to use that movie to dive into my next song pick, which is from another movie. I was introduced to this next song via another 1980s soundtrack, and this soundtrack came out in 1986. And the reason I knew this song and I learned about it was because Jerry O'Connell, the actor, was completely out of breath, saying, guys, let me catch my breath. I ran all the way from my house. And River Phoenix, Will Wheaton, and Corey Feldman broke into the Impala's 1959 hit, Sorry, I Ran All the Way Home. Reached number 2 on the US pop chart and number 28 on the UK singles chart. Very much like American Graffiti, Stand By Me has just one of those perfect snapshots of the golden oldies and doo-wop era, and we might not be done with that soundtrack yet.
So we go from 1960 in the Bronx, right, with the Belmonts, and formerly the Belmonts with Dion, and then we move down to go back in time to 1958 to Brooklyn with Joe Speedo Frazier and the Impalas. What a fantastic pick. The Stand By Me reference is, of course, amazing. One of those great coming of age stories that, you know, you can't argue with that soundtrack either. And again, we can talk about a whole lot of music that came off of that soundtrack.
Lead singer Joe Speedo Frazier. Great song, great pick. This is one of many oldies that I heard for the first time on the Sha Na Na TV show. And it's on the doo-wop box set, Volume 1. Just a great song.
Well, with that, Jimmy, we're back to you for track 7.
Okay. You've heard of this song, Unchained Melody, but most of you have probably never heard it as it's done by Vito and the Salutations. They did an up-tempo doo-wop version of this kind of went like a boom, 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 oh, my love, my darling, I hunger for your touch, you. In classic doo-wop style, with the lead being sung in falsetto, a falsetto that I can't come close to singing anymore. And it has the coolest, craziest vocal bass solo in the middle where they sing lonely. Yep, yep, rivers flow, flow, blim, blim, to the sea. Say, look at the sea, come pretty baby. And it was in the 1985 movie Joey, which if you had HBO in the 80s, you know that movies that you didn't care about were just on TV all day long, and you finally saw enough of it that you're interested in it.
Jimmy, I got to tell you, if you don't remember this story, when I started rehearsing with you guys back in, gosh, what was that? 1998, 97, somewhere around there. You came to me with the song and I said, that's not Unchained Melody. And you, if I had punched you square in the nose, I don't think I could have hurt you any further than I did when I said that. And I remember distinctly that you had said, oh, no. This was the doo-wop version of that song. 1955, Alex North, Hi Zaret, writing the song as a theme for the prison film Unchained of the same year, 1955. And Todd Duncan originally sang the lead vocals for the film soundtrack. This song, of course, went on. We could sit here and argue or debate over which song in the doo-wop era was the most covered song or the most iconic covered song. And I think that 1988 Ghost, or was that 90?
1990.
Okay. So yeah, 1990s Ghost, where the great scene with the pottery wheel and the clay going all over, and then revisited again in a Naked Gun movie with Leslie Nielsen and Priscilla Presley. Just hysterical. But yeah, and I got to tell you, once the Street Corner version of Vito and the Salutations version of this song in 1963 hit my eardrums, I was sold. And again, for me, it's all about those harmonies and the gorgeous back and forth that you get between the lead vocals and the background vocals that Jimmy mentioned just a little while ago.
Well, Vito and the Salutations version did reach number 66 on the Billboard US Hot 100 and was featured on a 1990s movie soundtrack as well. Like the 1985 movie Joey that you mentioned, Jimmy, was also featured in the 1990s movie Goodfellas. So both versions, the fast and slow, receiving their love in the films of the 80s and 90s. What's interesting is the fact that both Vito and the Salutations and the Righteous Brothers versions are both covers that go in completely different directions.
One interesting thing about that is that Vito and the Salutations version was kind of a New York cult thing. It didn't get a lot of play or no. I didn't know anything about it till it was on a TV show. And the Righteous Brothers version, from my perspective, growing up in this time, wasn't a very popular song until the movie Ghost. And then it just exploded. And I remember seeing the Righteous Brothers in concert, and they alluded to that it was a not well-regarded song until the movie Ghost.
All right, Jay, following up Unchained Melody, where do we go from here?
This is a good question. I can go in a couple of different directions here. I think, though, right about now is usually around the time where I point out that a significant lack of a certain sect of our species. We've got a song about a girl, but we don't have any girl voices in this mix yet. So let me rectify that. And let's travel to 1958. And it's a song written by another famous songwriter duo of Howard Greenfield and Neil Sedaka. And it is a huge hit for Connie Francis, Stupid Cupid.
I love the pick. There's another Connie Francis song that I like, Lipstick on Your Collar. Street Corner, we performed both of those songs back to back, and I always thought Lipstick was the better song. but the audience didn't think so. And Stupid Cupid, we ended up dropping Lipstick on Your Collar and just doing Stupid Cupid for a while. Connie Francis was somewhat of a failure with her record label, and till this song, I think, was recorded. And then she just had hit after hit after hit, and recorded in multi-languages. Great song for her. Great song choice, Jay.
Reached number 14 on the Billboard US Hot 100. And Jay, I don't know about you, but growing up with a daughter who loved the Princess Diaries movies in the 2000s, I actually remember Mandy Moore's cover being used in the movie.
Oh my gosh, I had forgotten that Mandy Moore had a cover of that. No,
Yes.
and now that you mention it, because so there's a story right there, Brian. You remember we were working at Westwood in early 2001, and Mandy Moore had come into the studio and was plugging that very vehicle.
Very much so, yes. Well, following up Stupid Cupid, I'm going to go with, man, I feel like I'm channeling some Gomez tonight from Playlist Wars days, because when I talked about the Impalas before being used in the movie Stand By Me, believe it or not, Sorry I Ran All the Way Home, while used in the movie for the joke like I talked about, wasn't on the actual soundtrack itself. And I want to use this point to actually pull a song directly from that soundtrack, because I really genuinely loved that entire soundtrack. And this one, the second time this evening, I'm going with this songwriting duo. It's again a Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller song, originally written in 1958. And I'm going to go with the Coasters' Yakety Yak. Don't talk back.
Oh,
It topped the U.S. R&B charts for 7 weeks and the top 100 pop list for 1 week. In 1999, the original recording was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and the saxophone solo in the song, which was performed by the legendary King Curtis, inspired the 1963 Boots Randolph song Yakety Sax, which then Chet Atkins reimagined as Yakety Axe as a solo artist, and then decades later as a duo with Mark Knopfler. And if you're a fan of that song and that duet, I highly suggest looking up the Song Dive episode of Mark Knopfler's Guitar Heroes Going Home, as Guy Fletcher from Dire Straits tells the entire story about that duo working together. And it's an incredible story that I highly recommend you check out. It's over on myweeklymixtape.com. And in 1988, if you want to really dive deep into that cover song rabbit hole, the Two Live Crew performed a version of the song for the Twins soundtrack, as well as Arnold Schwarzenegger while he was on the plane in the movie. I'll leave it up to you to decide which version you like more, the Two Live Crew or Arnold Schwarzenegger. But regardless, Yakety Yak by the Coasters, all-time classic.
You mentioned, so Yakety Sax obviously becoming the theme music for the Benny Hill show, which was a huge show over across the pond, as they say, in merry old England. And that was a favorite of my dad's when we were really, really young. And we were having sexy parties, Brian. It was a lot of fun watching them chase the girls around the car and as the Yakety Sax played. Atco Records, of course, being a huge label for this time period. You can't throw a rock without hitting. I think you're going to come to find this out. You can't throw a rock without hitting a Lieber and Stoller tune. They were prolific right up through the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And this song is just an incredible song. You scoop me. I actually had Along Came Jones, which is a Coasters tune. My uncle had this 8-tracks. Kids, 8-tracks used to be these little they were like plastic carts, but they had thicker tape. And my uncles had a bunch of these novelty 8-tracks. And I was introduced to a whole group of great songs like Ray Stevens' The Streak, and Along Came Jones was on that, Nervous Norvis, a whole bunch of different songs that also turned into my love for Dr. Demento, which is a whole nother show that we could get into another time. But yeah, you cannot go wrong with the Coasters. Anything by the Coasters is well received here.
Coasters, what a great pick. They also did Charlie Brown. A lot of hits. Searching, Yin Yang, Little Egypt. They fluid membership in this group, kind of like Street Corner and probably any band. Did you know, I heard on your last episode of the Oldies, you talked about Smokey Joe's Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that song was sung by the Robins, which were two members of the Coasters. Carl Gardner and Billy Guy moved to New York, and the other guys in the Robins didn't want to move, and they became the Coasters, theoretically because they went from East Coast or West Coast to East Coast. Also there's the Coasters, the Drifters, the Platters. A lot of these groups were imitated and sold as the real group, and they had no relation to these people. And Bowser, John Bauman, testified to Congress, and they actually made into law, passed the bill in the Truth in Music Act, that you have to have had an actual person or somebody that had something to do with that group at that time. That bill's kind of gone by the wayside because they've all passed on, and some of those phony groups are probably still out there.
Oh yeah, you get that all the time. And prior to that law being signed in, that you got a lot of groups who were kicking around and would fall apart and reform again. I think the Detroit Spinners, for example, were eventually morphed into the Spinners, and you went for some doo-wop stuff that the Detroit Spinners used to do to Working My Way Back to You cover in the 70s and the early 80s, where they, it was a completely different sound for them.
Well, Jimmy, you kicked off side A, but the way our roundtable is working, you get to close it as well. What are we closing out side A with?
I'm going to go Shaboom, Life Could Be a Dream. Now, this is an early doo-wop song by the R&B vocal group The Chords. Please don't confuse it with the exact same song done by the Crew Cuts. This song was written by a bunch of guys in '54 in New York City. And the Oranges, there's a really cool YouTube video of this. Boom was slang. And they'd say, come across Jay in the street, hey, Jay, boom. Hey, Brian, how you doing? Boom. And shaboom was kind of like a bomb. Shh, boom. And then, nadi ding dong, lang a lang lang. There were a lot of churches on the street, and they were always going ding dong, lang a lang a lang a lang a lang. And then the words, whoa, whoa, bip, fa-doo-ba-doo-ba-dip. Bip was an uncle of one of the singers. And Bip was a bit of a drinker. And these guys would be rehearsing in the hallways of their apartment house. And Bip would come into that hallway, and he had an aroma problem when he had been drinking. And they go, whoa, Bip, fa-doo-ba-doo-ba-dip. And if you compare that to the cleaned up versions of the Crew Cuts of the lyrics, they're night and day. The Crew Cuts, in the 50s, a lot of Southern radio stations and other radio stations didn't want to appeal to what they called race music. And the Crew Cuts from Canada covered, they had a lot of hits. I think they took this one to number one. And none of them were their own. They were all covers of Black artists.
This song, for me, it serves so many memories because of one of my favorite shows that I've ever performed. And I think I may have mentioned it a few times on the various podcasts that you and I have done, Brian, is Forever Plaid, which featured a quick vignette where one of the members of the Plaids, the four Plaids, starts singing about talking about the jukebox that was in the diner that his parents used to run when he was a child, and they'd give him the guys would come by and replace the 45s, and they would hand them down to this character, and he puts the 45 record up to his mouth and starts singing Shaboom by the Crew Cuts, and his lips get stuck in the little 45 hole, and it's very funny. It was a great sight gag, and we had a really, really great time with that. But of course, the Crew Cuts version has been all over pop culture, most notably in Back to the Future.
And it's considered the first doo-wop song to reach the top 10 on the pop charts. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, because the Crew Cuts version did hit number one, like Jimmy mentioned earlier, in the same year. can you imagine in 2024 if a song by, I don't know, Dua Lipa was just covered by Ava Max about a month or two later? That's something that happened in the 50s all the time. A song would get released and then another band would release it. And then, and there's sometimes 3, 4, 5 versions of a song out there. As a song itself, Rolling Stone ranked it number 215 on its 500 best songs of all time. And along with Back to the Future, Jay, the song was also featured in Clue, Roadhouse, and for the parents that are our age, Jay, the 2006 Pixar/Disney classic Cars, if you consider it a classic or not, that's here nor there. But this song, yeah, I was going to say, I figured you would, with a son that probably watched it all the time. I've seen it way too many times, even with 2 girls in the house. But this song, again, just transcended bands, decades. It's just an absolute classic. And what a great way to conclude side A of our Golden Oldies and Doo-Wop mixtape, which kicked off with the Silhouettes' Get a Job, Little Anthony and the Imperials' Tears on My Pillow, the Clovers' Love Potion number 9, the Marcel's Blue Moon, Dion's Runaround Sue, the Impalas' Sorry I Ran All the Way Home, Vito and the Salutations' Unchained Melody, Connie Francis's Stupid Cupid, the Coasters' Yakety Yak, and the Chords' Shaboom. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Now, Jay, I'm flipping this 45 over to side B, if you want to call it a 45, because that's what a lot of these songs were back in the 50s and 60s. What are you serving up for us for track 1?
Oh, what a great segue right there. I do want to say it's very interesting that you use the term serving up and kind of referencing the buffet or the feast that we are currently engaged in here. A lot of, so again, in high school and early in my college years, before I'd gotten hooked up at the radio station, I was helping my family friends manage the Heroes and Legends Cafe at the Great New York State Fairgrounds. And we would, and that was a place that my grandmother's, my grandmother's friend's son bought
nieces,
and
nephews,
managed.
uncles, cousins, former roommate.
Yes. But he bought this part of or leased this part of the Center of Progress building at the Great New York State Fair and turned this into a 50s and 60s themed diner with the bright pink and baby blue lights, and the floor tiles were marble with the black and the white checker pattern. It was a great little throwback. And on the Muzak system, which I don't think is called Muzak anymore, they used to run a whole lot of these doo-wop, these great doo-wop songs. And I got to really every night would just, while I'm sweeping the floors like Goldie in the Back to the Future, I'm going to be mayor someday. We would sing along into the broom handles, and the customers would just love it. We had a great time with that. And one of my favorite songs that would ever play on the system was One Summer Night by the Danaliers.
Wow.
It's been a while since I've sung on a podcast, period.
Boom, 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 boom.
Nice.
It's almost like blow harmony, which is a real thing. It's not dirty. It's just singing while you're expelling air. Who's the group that did that a lot? The Moon Glows. Oh, oh, oh. But yeah, the Danaliers, One Summer Night. What a great song. Just kind of in 58, one of those songs that you would fall in love with on the radio as you're watching the submarine races with your girl. I didn't do that in 58. I was born in 59, but I've heard about it.
Reached number 4 on the then Billboard US Black Singles Chart and number 7 on the US Best-Selling Pop Singles Chart. While the song sold over 1 million copies, it was, for the second time tonight, this band's only hit, a one-hit wonder. Although in 1961, the Diamonds covered the song, and that version went on to reach number 22 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Once again, songs just getting reused and recycled and reshuffled through. They're like, well, this was a hit 3 years ago. Let's make it a hit again. And it really, they didn't waste any time with turnaround. They just kept recycling these songs. And if it was a hit once, there was a good chance it was going to be a hit a second time. And I'm going to use that as my reasoning for my next pick, because this song was a top 10 hit on the Billboard US charts twice. The first time in 1961, it reached number 4 on the Billboard US Hot 100, number 27 on the UK singles chart, and number 16 in Canada. Then, the end of 1986 and the beginning of 1987, because of the movie soundtrack of the same name that I've already mentioned twice tonight, I don't care, it went back and reached number 9 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and was a top 10 hit in 8 countries, including West Germany, Austria, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. And it also hit number 1 on the UK singles chart, as well as in Ireland and Canada. I'm going with Ben E. King's Stand By Me. Third time, I'm going back to the Lieber and Stoller well. However, this time, they wrote under the pseudonym Emo Glick, so I guess you could put an asterisk on that one for me. Now, Jay, you talked about a lot of covers of songs happening. There's over 400 covers of Stand By Me, including Otis Redding, Tracy Chapman, Weezer, and Florence and the Machine, among many, many, many others. One of the most iconic bass lines ever.
No question about it. You've got Benny King, who also, by the way, came from the Drifters. Notably, was lead singer on the song "There Goes My Baby." That guy could wail. There's no question about the power. When you talk about rhythm and blues, Benny King, if he is not part of that conversation, you have a missed opportunity there for sure.
Great singer with the Drifters. He was actually with a group called the Five Crowns. And back in the day when I think it was the Treadwell family owned the trademark of the Drifters, they were unhappy with those guys. They fired all 5 of them. They said, hey, 5 Crowns, you're now the Drifters. And that was Benny King and Charlie Thomas, who's also in the Hall of Fame with Benny King as the Drifters. And Benny King went solo because he could make more money that way. And the producers would say, you don't need a baritone singer. You can get that sound from a trombone, and you don't need the second tenor because you can get that on the piano or whatever. And they had doo-wop sounding instrumental that sounded like voices, or the same that they would do.
All right, Jimmy, what are you going to follow up Stand By Me with?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, you know what? You just mentioned this. Here's another example of songs that were covered. So here's a song, Little Darlin'. It was written by 16-year-old Maurice Williams and the Gladiolas. And if you've seen the PBS special, the Diamonds sang this song with Maurice playing piano and then came out and did a verse with them. I actually like the Diamonds version better, but I think might be a little tainted here. When we were street corner, somehow when we wanted to get noticed, we would go out and just show up at places and sing. And WSEN in Syracuse, Jay mentioned that on the last program we did, had Oldies shows at the Landmark Theater in Syracuse. So one year we went and we just kind of showed up and were singing as they were standing in line. And then we weaseled our way into the box office and we saw a cop looking at us, kind of funny. And he walked up to us and we thought we were going to get thrown out. And he said, you guys do any Dion? So we were invited back the next year by the radio station to do the after party. And down the stairs is my 6th grade through high school classmate, Wendy Kay, who was the manager for David Somerville of the Diamonds. And he was doing his act solo. We were singing in the still of the night, and this man in his tuxedo walked over, stood next to us, and started singing the bass line. Boom, ba ba boom, 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 boom. It was cool.
Wow.
That is an amazing story. You mentioned Maurice Williams, who went on to be with the Zodiacs as well and featured in the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. And Little Darling, what a fun song with the percussion and the vocalizations of the yeah. It was so much fun to listen to this stuff. And you can't go wrong with, again, the American Graffiti soundtrack.
Of course, we're going to keep going back to these 80s and 90s soundtracks, and I'm probably going to do it again tonight. And no, I don't care. But yeah, you have to. I mean, the Diamonds version went on to reach number 2 on the US Billboard Hot 100, number 11 in Canada. So probably the more known version. But again, you had mentioned Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs, who did Stay, which was on Dirty Dancing. I mean, all of these songs, for at least my generation, was learned through the pop culture of the 80s, going back and revisiting them. And it also helped, like I mentioned on Volume 1, that my father was in a car club, and we used to go to all of these car shows all the time, Lead East and all the different swap meets that had a lot of different bands playing and a lot of different vendors selling cassettes that were comprised of nothing but 50s and 60s music. So I really got my education through that. And Little Darlin' was always one of those songs that I thought was a standout doo-wop track. I loved some of the vocalization, just how they would take one word and just stretch it out. And just holding the notes and kind of building it in this almost rhythmic, percussive, like you said, Jay, pattern in the song. And Little Darlin' was one of those ones that, I mean, what the hell is a bump bump shawadi wadi? I don't know, but I was invested in that shawadi wadi every time I heard that song. And with that, Jay, I'm throwing it back to you to bump bump shawadi wadi into track 4.
All right. We can peel off of that American Graffiti soundtrack again. I'm going to take an artist that was featured on that soundtrack, but I'm not going to go with the song that was featured in American Graffiti with it. I'm going to go with the Crests. Mm-hmm. And obviously 16 Candles was probably one of their most notable songs, if not the most notable Crest song. Immediate flashbacks to my sophomore year or freshman year of high school, where this girl that I absolutely had the worst crush on ever was turning 16 that year. And I called her up and played 16 Candles over the phone for her birthday. And she ended up with the quarterback of the football team because, of course, how do you not? But the Crests also had a song that I absolutely love the way that this song is arranged, and the vocal harmonies in this is called My Juanita.
Well, Jay, we used to do that song, and it was on the doo-wop box set, but it wasn't the original recording. It was with the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, Johnny Maestro, after the Crests had split up, I'd mentioned the Dion song, the Del Satins. Johnny Maestro joined the Del Satins, and they would do shows. And in 68, his manager, Betty Sperber, she did like a Battle of the Bands thing. And there was a horn band called the Rhythm Method, I think. And somebody said, well, let's get the Del Satins and merge them with the Rhythm Method. And somebody said, oh yeah, that'll be easy to sell as the Brooklyn Bridge. So they became the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And it was with the Brooklyn Bridge during a live performance that they would sing that song, the first verse and the first chorus a cappella, and then kick up with the sax solo and then finish the song. And it was a very cool rockin' number. And like I said, Street Corner did that a lot, and as we did it totally a cappella.
Now, Jay, this song came out in 1956, and while it didn't chart, this was one of the songs that helped the Crests get discovered while they were singing in the New York City subways. So to me, that was like an important part of their history. I'm surprised you didn't go with 16 Candles, because there would have been another movie reference, regardless if it was on the soundtrack or not, because who can forget the John Hughes classic from the 80s? And then while we're talking cover songs, obviously the Stray Cats cover of the song from that original soundtrack. But musically, coming out of Little Darlin', My Juanita makes perfect sense here. And I think to follow that up, I'm going to go with another song that was featured on a 1980s soundtrack. Although, for everybody who's cringing, I'm not going to pull something from the Stand By Me or American Graffiti soundtrack this time. No. I'm going to pull something that immediately people are going to think of the number one hit cover from the wildly popular 1987 movie of the same name, which starred Lou Diamond Phillips.
Oh,
Because Los Lobos' cover of the song La Bamba was not only number one in the US, it was number one in over a dozen countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, France, and Spain. But we're not here to talk about Los Lobos. Jay, in another Wait, That's a Cover Song example, and no, I'm not talking about Los Lobos. I'm talking about Ritchie Valens' 1958 version of the song La Bamba here. La Bamba, Ritchie Valens' version, is a cover as well, because the original was recorded in either 1938 or 1939 by Alvaro Hernandez Ortiz under the name El Jarocho. And I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation there. But Valens' version went on to reach number 22 on the Billboard US Hot 100, number 49 on the UK singles chart, number 89 in Australia, and was a number one hit in Canada. Valens' version ranked number 35 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. And while it's more than likely because of the Los Lobos version, the song lives in the Weird Al parody songbook as well, because on the Even Worse album, we got Lasagna.
That's right.
So we have to talk about Ritchie Valens in this list. I feel like just an iconic song that I don't know how I didn't squeeze it into volume one. I had to find a way to squeeze it in here, and coming out of My Juanita, I think it's a perfect fit.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Ritchie Valens obviously had this was a song, if I'm not mistaken, and Jimmy, you might know a little bit better than I would, the record company did not want him to do this song because it is considered more of a traditional Mexican folk song, correct?
It's a Mexican folk song. In fact, you go to Mexico now, you're going to hear that song all over from the mariachi bands walking the street.
And Ritchie had some beautiful songs, of course, Odana, which was a wonderful song. And then, unfortunately, as his career was just taking off, no pun intended, the plane that he was taking also, unfortunately, crashed in a storm and ended his life and his career abruptly. Who knows what might have been, as he just was an unstoppable force in 1958.
Come On, Let's Go is another hit of his.
Oh, yeah.
17 years old, and probably physically the most mismatched actor playing a role, because Ritchie Valens was a pretty big guy and Lou Diamond Phillips, not so much. And you mentioned Los Lobos. They were actually in the film as the mariachi band. And I believe that they recorded the song for the movie, because they couldn't get a quality from the original 57 cut of Ritchie Valens. I don't know if it was 57, but the original cut wasn't good enough. So Los Lobos remade it. And that's why it was very faithful to the Ritchie Valens version for that reason.
And Brian, we talked about Brian Setzer's cover of Summertime Blues, which was another fantastic song. And the La Bamba soundtrack, the movie soundtrack, is loaded with some really, really great covers.
I mean, how many times can we say the 80s really knew how to go back to the 50s well, and they did it time and time again, and it was always successful in one way or another. And for very, very, very good reasons. Jimmy, what are you going to follow up La Bamba with?
I'm tempted to go Buddy Holly, but I'm going to fight it off. I was also tempted to go Brooklyn Bridge, but I think that would violate some rules. So this is just a fantastic love song of a young man getting ready to go out on a date in the 50s. It's by a group called the Jive Five. It's not their more popular song, My True Story, which was a hit, but What Time Is It? And this is another song that I first heard and fell in love with on the Sha Na Na TV show. And it's got, you know, the church chimes, bong, bong, bum, bum, tick, tock, listen to the clock. And it's this kid getting ready for a date. What time is it? It's 6 o'clock. Better hurry up and put my tie on. Just a wonderful, wonderful song to listen to and slow dance with your honey to. Oh, and another thing with the Jive 5, they've got a 5-second hit that you guys have probably heard, but they were the creators and the performers of Nick, Nickelodeon.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. But yeah, the Jive 5 originally started in 1954 as the Genies. Eugene Pitt, Jerome Hanna, Richard Harris, Thurman Prophet, also known as Billy Prophet at the time, and Norman Johnson. They renamed themselves the Jive 5 and found chart success in 1961 with My True Story. Belltone Records reached number 3, right, Brian, on the top Hot 100?
Yes, My True Story reached number 3. And What Time Is It reached number 67. They had 10 hit songs between 1961 and 1968. And then fast forward almost 4 decades later to 2006, It's Christmas hit number 157 on the US charts as well. So one of these bands that I feel like, I don't know, didn't get as much due as they should. And I had no idea about the Nickelodeon thing. That just blew my mind.
That's wild.
So I love that.
Well, he obviously stayed in the business, and they were very popular on the oldie circuit. They were on the PBS specials. Gene Pitt, he passed a few years ago, but he was in the industry till the day he died.
All right, Jay, with that, we are back to you for track 7.
Well, I think it would be a shame if we did not pull up this next artist. I cannot let an entire mixtape go without hearing the dulcet, wonderful, soulful tones of Sam Cooke. And I think coming out of a song of What Time Is It, I think we should go into What a Wonderful World.
Oh, you scoop me.
Don't know much biology.
History.
Don't know much history. Don't know much trigonometry. Don't know much of anything, really. I'm empty up here in my head.
A funny thing about this song, misunderstood lyrics. There's an oldies band very popular up in these parts. I won't use their name. But there's the one lyric, don't know what a slide rule is for. Do you guys know what a slide rule is? Because these guys sang, don't know what a slide ruler is for. Because they had no idea that a slide rule, if you were old like me, and in the 8th grade in science class, and you'll have to look this up on the internet, but the slide rule is basically like an analog calculator. It was a ruler and it slid and it had gadgets and clear plastic on it, and you could do your multiplication and division, and you could do cosines and tangents and mathematical symbols that I don't even understand.
Oh my God, core memory unlocked.
Yeah. So, and it's a lyric that is not understood by anybody who's younger than me.
I absolutely remember the slide ruler that had that little piece that you would slide along. I had one of those, and you just unlocked a memory from my childhood that Jesus. Oh my God.
The closest thing I think that I can relate to that is the old scales at your doctor's office, right? That you would slide the weight down the, it's a similar
down. Mine was always going up. Well, Jay, I have to go with another movie reference here. I know, even though in 1960, the song reached number 12 on the US Billboard Hot 100, number 27 on the UK singles chart, I can't think of this song and not picture John Belushi stacking food onto his tray in Animal House right before the food fight. Every time I hear this song, I hear, I'm a zit.
I'm a zit.
Get it? I absolutely love the song, and I'm not going to lie, I was introduced to it because of Animal House.
Sam Cooke had a couple of songs on that soundtrack as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's, once again, another soundtrack that borrowed heavily from the 50s and 60s.
I was in college when that movie came out, And unfortunately for this one kid, he decided having a food fight would be really cool. And he had a food fight and it got kicked out of school.
Oh, no.
Whoa.
Yeah. SUNY Delhi.
Well, to follow that up, I am actually going to jump on something you said, Jimmy, because you floated a name out there before and you didn't go with it. And I'm not going to miss the shot because I only have a couple songs left. Buddy Holly, we got to get him in here. And I'm going to go with a song that was originally recorded by Buddy Holly and the Tree Tunes in 1956 and then re-recorded a year later by Buddy Holly and the Crickets in 1957. That'll Be the Day. Reached number 1 on the Billboard US Hot 100 and the UK Singles Chart. This song was recorded by a bunch of other artists and bands, such as Linda Ronstadt, whose incredible version of the song reached number 11 on the US Billboard Hot 100, as well as this group called the Quarrymen, who would eventually go on to be known as some group called the Beatles. I don't know, maybe you heard of them. But Buddy Holly's one of those artists that did so much for music in such a short period of time and was such a major influence on the state of rock and roll, even now, to this day, that I don't think we could go, Jay, through 2 volumes of Golden Oldies and not talk about the incredible contributions he made to the world of music, period.
No, absolutely not. And again, Buddy Holly was on that plane with the Big Bopper and with Richie Valens. And you mentioned the Tree Tunes. He had the Crickets, and he did his own thing, which is just a testament to how much the guy could put out. Oddly enough, so Buddy Holly reference again all over pop culture. You remember a little show called Quantum Leap with Scott Bakula? They did an episode where Sam leaped back and Buddy Holly was the farmhand, and he was writing Peggy Sue about a pig, and he called it Peggy Sue.
Hey, buddy, try Peggy Sue.
That's right. Dean Stockwell, Scott Bakula.
Yep.
I don't remember the young actor who was playing young Buddy Holly at that point, but
Don't even.
what a great show, great pick. You gotta love That'll Be the Day. Again, featured prominently on the American Graffiti soundtrack and all over pop culture.
Great choice. 2 things with Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper that died in the plane crash. Do you know who also was on that tour who decided not to buy a seat on that plane? And it was because it would have cost him around $56. And that was about a month's rent for his parents' apartment in the Bronx. And that's Dion, who was on tour with the Belmonts.
Oh, no
who was
kidding.
on that tour.
I knew that story.
And Dion has a wonderful interview. It's lengthy, it's detailed, but it's fascinating. But anyway, we're talking about Buddy Holly. He was a soul of rock and roll, and he wrote so many songs, great hits. Who knows what he would have done had he lived?
For sure.
That was a great choice.
Well, we are at that point, gentlemen. We are down to 1 song pick each to close out Volume 2. Jimmy, what is your last song choice of the evening?
Oh, going to go with a Jerry Lee Lewis song, but this really isn't about Jerry Lee Lewis. Whole lot of shaking going on.
Nice.
About the time that I was researching and deciding these songs that I wanted to do for this set list on September 5th, Screamin' Scott Simon of Sha Na, who was not with the band in Woodstock, but he was with the band for 50 years. And he passed away at the age of 75 of sinus cancer. And he was the kind of rock and roll piano player that Jerry Lee Lewis called the best rock piano player in rock and roll. And he would play with his arm and with his feet and his elbows. And when he saw an ad, he was a Columbia student and he was graduating. And Sha Na's piano player, Joe Whitkin, was going on to med school because most of these guys in Sha Na, all but about 5 of them, they eventually went on to grad school. They became lawyers, one became a rabbi. They were theologians, they were professors. And some of these guys, John Bowser joined the band because he was going into music as a career. And Scott Simon played a whole lot of shaking going on, with the rest of the band, and he just blew those guys away. He became a managing partner with them. He took care of all the details on the road. And, you know, the Sha Na Na fans, there's maybe, oh God, there's got to be 7 or 8 dozen of us. But, you know, this is how important it is. He had his obituary in the New York Times.
Wow. And I mean, when you talk about that boogie woogie rock pianists, the conversation just, it's almost like a niche. You've got your Jerry Lee Lewis, you got your screaming Scott Simons, and it invokes a whole genre of emotion, if you will. And I'll tell you, you know, Jerry Lee Lewis, for the controversy and all of the behind the scenes stuff that was going on, I remember reading a book that a good friend of mine had recommended, gosh, eons ago, but it was about a rockabilly musician who could just bang out on that piano, kind of a cross between an Elvis and a Jerry Lee Lewis. And when you read the descriptions and you can hear Jerry Lee playing in the background and making the piano sing. It's an amazing pick. Love the story behind that. Excellent, Jimmy. Excellent.
Originally recorded in 1955 by Big Mabel, the Killers version. No, not the Killers like the band now. Jerry Lee Lewis, the Killer.
Jerry Lee Lewis was the Killer.
Yes, 1957. His version reached number 3 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, as well as, and I think this part's extremely important and interesting here, it reached number 1 on both the R&B as well as country charts. Sun Records we're talking about here. R&B and country charts, this song had a massive crossover appeal. I mean, that is literally 2 completely different musical demographics, straight to number 1. It also hit number 8 on the UK singles chart. And in 1999, the song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. And in 2004, Rolling Stone ranked it the 61st greatest song of all time. And in 2005, the Library of Congress selected it for permanent preservation in the National Recording Registry. Obviously, I've talked about movies and 80s movies all night tonight. I'll just throw out there Dennis Quaid in the 1989 film Great Balls of Fire.
Oh, yeah.
That one was another time where a soundtrack was all dedicated to that sound and style. And Jerry Lee Lewis went and re-recorded all of those songs for the soundtrack. And they all, again, started getting radio airplay once again in the late 80s, which I thought was amazing.
You know that Jerry Lee Lewis had a famous cousin who's also a piano player, more of a country guy, Mickey Gilley.
Really?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know the relation.
Look on YouTube. There's some talk of that and them playing together.
Wow.
And Mickey Gilley was on the Sha Na Na TV show.
Oh. Well, Mr. Sweet, it's your last pick of the night.
All right, let's keep this piano rock going. And we're going to go with a little Richard Wayne Penniman, also known as Little Richard. And I'm going to go with Tutti Frutti.
Nice.
Did you know when they approached him about recording that song, he's like, we can't do that. It's a dirty song. But the lyrics were Tutti Frutti, good booty. Get it greasy? Slides easy. So he cleaned that up to record, and that became a hit. And then it was ultimately, you know, this is the mid-50s, late 50s we're talking about, the homogenization of rock and roll. It was done by Pat Boone, who cleaned up the lyrics even more. And there's a TV appearance on YouTube where he's wearing his sport coat slung over his shoulders so he could look cool.
Song was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998, and Rolling Stone magazine declared the refrain, and I quote, the most inspired rock lyrics ever recorded. In 2007, Mojo ranked Tutti Frutti number 1 on the top 100 records that changed the world, calling the song the sound of the birth of rock and roll. And since I'm Mr. Movie Phone tonight, I'm going to go with a real deep, terrible pick here. And if you know this movie, you're going to either cheer with me or cringe with me. 1988's Hot to Trot with Bobcat Goldthwait and John Candy as the voice of Don the Talking Horse.
Brian, there's another actor in there that brings this full circle. John Jaco Marcelino of Sha Na Na was one with Dabney Coleman, one of the bad guys, trying to get this horse.
Wow. So you both know the movie too.
Only because of Jaco.
All right, Brian, bring us home.
I'm going to bring us home now, and I'm going to go with, guess what? Another 1980s movie reference. Because, Jay, we went through Volume 1, and we've gotten all the way through Volume 2, and we haven't talked any Chuck Berry. So, written and recorded by Chuck Berry in 1958, although you might have to credit his cousin Marvin for the assist. See if you get that reference. Believe it or not.
Marvin Berry. And the
Johnny
Starlighters.
Be Good. Believe it or not, this song only reached number 8 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 and was not a number 1 hit for Chuck Berry. And it ranked higher, number 7 to be exact, on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. So I guess that more than made up with it. But for our generation, Marty McFly, like you said, Jimmy, and the Starlighters covered the song on the 1985 Back to the Future soundtrack. And then in 1988, Jay, we're going to raise up our metal horns for this one. Judas Priest famously, or infamously, depending on how you want to look at it, covered the song as the title track to the movie of the same name, as well as their Ram It Down LP. Do you remember Judas Priest's cover of Johnny Be Good?
I don't, but I'm going to go back and listen to it now.
It opens up with a Rob Halford scream that will send shivers down your spine. It is not the Johnny Be Good you are familiar with. So much so that it came on shuffle in the car, and Katie, my wife, turned to me and she goes, "The hell are you listening to?"
Well, to that, I can only say maybe she's not ready for that, but her kids are going to love it. Chuck Berry is another one of the artists that you cannot have a conversation about classic, and I say classic before I say rock, but it's not classic rock. It's that classic rock and roll. You can't have a conversation about that without including Chuck Berry, one of the pioneers of guitar rock and a very prolific songwriter, had some great songs throughout his entire career. And Cleveland, Ohio, if I'm not mistaken, right, is where he hails from.
I'm not sure. You could be right.
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm going to have to look that up. But for now, Jimmy?
Yeah, a couple things with this song. It was on a Lost Tapes recording of Chuck Berry, Johnny Be Good. And they started out, and you hear him go, "Stop, huh, wait, you and the piano. You're playing Roll Over Beethoven. Stay away from that. Stay away from that." It's basically the same song. And another story, I mentioned my friend Wendy Kay, who is she deals in oldies acts. So for our high school reunions, she books the bands. So at one reunion, Terry Silvestri of the Hollies was there with their band, The Criers, and Denny Lane from Paul McCartney and Wings. And I was allowed to go up, and I started singing a song, Johnny Be Good. And I went up on the second half of the first verse. And on the video, you can see the bass player is looking at me, he's getting ready to sing, and he figured out where I was. And when you go up on the lyrics, you just start making sound. So, and then I finished the verse and went into it. And then up to the stage comes Denny Lane playing guitar along with me. And then as soon as that's over, he goes, "Man, that was great. What else do you know?" And we did What I Say, and we both sang it together. So
Ray Charles classic.
Cool. Yeah.
Very
Awesome.
cool.
But with Chuck Berry, Johnny Be Good, you can't close a tape better than that.
No, and I couldn't have been any further from the truth with Cleveland, Ohio. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri.
There's probably
what are you
people
gonna do?
screaming and yelling at the radio.
That's right.
Who needs facts, Jay? That's why I bring you on the show.
You can find me at J Sweet on Facebook. Yeah, you can bring it. I deserve
He's
that.
in that building in Cleveland, Ohio now, but
That he is. But yeah, that's what a great way to end a record.
Well, there you have it, mixtapers. Side B of our Golden Oldies and Doo-Wop Mixtape Volume 2, which consists of the Dan Lear's One Summer Night, Benny King's Stand By Me, the Diamonds or the Gladiolas' Little Darlin', the Crests' My Juanita, Richie Valens' La Bamba, the Jive Five, What Time Is It, Sam Cooke's What a Wonderful World, Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day, Jerry Lee Lewis's Whole Lot of Shakin' Going On, Little Richard's Tutti Frutti, and Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Well, gentlemen, this has been an extremely fun discussion tonight. Thank you both for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
Been a pleasure.
Honored to be here. So glad you asked me. Thank you.
And remember, listeners, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can enjoy ad-free episodes of the show, become a future guest, chime in on upcoming show topics, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.